What you are about to hear might be the most disturbing thing to come out of the entire WrestleMania 42 build, and if you have been following this rivalry even casually, that is saying something extraordinary. Brock Lesnar, the man who has spent 2 full decades being the most feared predator in professional wrestling, was hunted down in a car park after the cameras stopped rolling, and he has never, in 20 years of doing this, looked as broken as he did in that moment. This is not a storyline development. This is not a scripted dramatic beat designed to sell pay-per-view tickets. What happened at the loading docks of the Golden One Center on the night of the final Monday Night Raw before WrestleMania 42 was a genuine, visceral, blood-soaked statement of intent from a man who has decided, entirely on his own terms and without anyone's permission, that the era of Brock Lesnar is over. Welcome to Wrestling Juice, and what we are about to break down for you is the single most significant post-show development in the entire build to WrestleMania 42, covering every brutal detail, every cascading implication for Sunday, and the question that nobody inside WWE can currently answer with any confidence, which is whether Brock Lesnar is actually going to be physically capable of competing at WrestleMania at all. Before we get into it, if you enjoy this kind of content, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of people watching this right now are not subscribed, and subscribing is completely free, but it makes an enormous difference to how this channel grows and how we are able to keep bringing you this kind of coverage. If you are already subscribed, you are genuinely brilliant, and we appreciate you more than you know. Now let us get into exactly what happened and why it matters as much as it does. To understand the full weight of what Oba Femi did at those loading docks, you have to first appreciate the context of why Triple H's no-contact policy existed in the first place, because he did not arrive at that policy through caution or bureaucratic habit. He arrived at it through weeks of watching 2 of the most physically dangerous men on the WWE roster destroy every single attempt to keep them separated in the lead-up to the biggest show of the year. This was not a precautionary measure born out of administrative routine. This was a desperate, carefully engineered management strategy built on the singular objective of getting both competitors to Las Vegas healthy enough to actually have the match that the entire WWE universe had been anticipating. The go-home Raw contract signing, which was conducted with the 2 men in entirely separate physical locations rather than face-to-face at the same table, was the clearest possible expression of how seriously Triple H had taken the threat these 2 men posed to each other and to the structural integrity of the entire WrestleMania card. Separate locations for the signatures. Security personnel assigned specifically and exclusively to each individual. A logistical framework built with the kind of meticulous, exhaustive attention to detail that you only apply when you are managing 2 people who have already demonstrated, repeatedly and emphatically, that they are physically incapable of sharing the same space without catastrophic consequences following immediately. And for the duration of Monday Night Raw's television broadcast, it worked. The show went off the air without a significant incident between the 2 men. Triple H's plan, for approximately the length of time that the cameras were rolling and the production was live, appeared to have achieved exactly what it was designed to achieve. And then Oba Femi went to the loading docks, and everything Triple H had built came apart in the most brutal way imaginable. The loading docks of a major arena are about as far from the glamour and spectacle of a WWE production as it is possible to get while still being inside the same building. This is where the equipment trucks back in and unload. This is where the production infrastructure gets broken down and reloaded after the show. This is where performers make their exits through service entrances, through industrial corridors and functional spaces that have absolutely nothing of the theatrical architecture of the public-facing venue. It is unglamorous, utilitarian, and entirely devoid of the performance environment that professional wrestling operates within. It is, in other words, the very last place in the world you would expect a WrestleMania storyline to continue after the broadcast has concluded, which is precisely and deliberately why Oba Femi chose it. Because the broadcast being over meant the cameras were down, the production was in the process of wrapping. The security apparatus that had been specifically deployed to maintain maximum separation between these two men was beginning to stand down from its highest operational alert. The window between the end of the show and Brock Lesnar's physical departure from the arena represented the single moment in the entire evening where Triple H's carefully constructed safety net had the greatest number of gaps in it, and Oba Femi had clearly identified every single one of those gaps in advance. He did not stumble upon Lesnar by accident. He found him deliberately, intentionally, and with a very specific plan already fully formed in his mind for what he was going to do once he got there. The detail that he systematically dismantled, Lesnar's personal security detail, before ever reaching Lesnar himself, is one that deserves considerably more attention than it has received in the initial wave of reporting, because of what it communicates about where Oba Femi's psychological state actually is right now. He did not sneak past security. He did not find a gap and slip through undetected. He went through it directly and methodically, with no apparent hesitation and no visible concern whatsoever about the consequences of physically assaulting WWE personnel in a car park after the broadcast had ended. The people standing between Oba Femi and his target on this particular night were not circumvented or avoided. They were removed as efficiently and as violently as any obstacle he has ever encountered across his entire career. That is not a competitor trying to manufacture a psychological edge in the days before the biggest match of his life. That is something considerably more primal and considerably more frightening than that. That is a predator who has identified his prey and has made the absolute non-negotiable determination that nothing, not Triple H's no-contact policy, not security personnel, not the post-broadcast logistics of a major WWE production, is going to stand between him and his target. The ambush itself was swift, savage, and completely overwhelming in its deliberateness. The thunderous forearm strike that initiated the assault, delivered as Lesnar was moving towards his private SUV, presumably operating under the entirely reasonable assumption that the night was finished, and the next time he would have to deal with any of this was in Las Vegas, sent the beast reeling into the side of the vehicle, with an impact that immediately and fundamentally reframed the power dynamics of everything the WWE Universe thought it understood about this rivalry. Because Brock Lesnar being caught off guard is one thing. Brock Lesnar being sent staggering and losing his footing from a single forearm strike is something else entirely. The visual of it, the man who has been the apex predator of professional wrestling for 2 full decades rocked back against his own vehicle by a single blow, was jarring in a way that the previous weeks of confrontation, for all their violence and chaos and extraordinary television moments, had not quite managed to produce. It was the first moment in the entire history of this rivalry where Lesnar looked genuinely, physically vulnerable rather than simply strategically disadvantaged, and the distinction between those two things matters enormously. What followed the opening forearm was not a brawl in any traditional sense of that word. It was not the chaotic, improvised back-and-forth exchange of two competitors who have encountered each other unexpectedly and are responding to the adrenaline and disorientation of an unplanned confrontation. It was methodical. It was targeted. It was executed with the kind of specific, purposeful, calculated violence that makes it impossible to characterize as anything other than premeditated. Oba Femi arrived at those loading docks knowing exactly what he was going to do, and he did it with a precision and a focus that was as impressive as it was frightening. The steel equipment crate that was used to drive into Lesnar's ribs was not a spontaneous weapon of opportunity grabbed in the heat of the moment. It was the immediate, logical escalation of someone who arrived fully prepared to inflict damage that would not simply fade overnight. Lesnar's ribs have been the specific, recurring target throughout the entire arc of this rivalry. This is the area that has accumulated damage across weeks of confrontations, the vulnerability that has been probed and exploited repeatedly as the program has built towards Wrestlemania. Oba Femi drove that equipment crate into those ribs with a precision that demonstrated not just physical power, but intimate, detailed knowledge of exactly where the beast was most compromised and most susceptible to the kind of damage that compounds and lingers rather than heals quickly. The closed-fist strikes that followed were a relentless, accumulated assault designed to build on existing injury in the most efficient and devastating way possible. And the result of all of it, the detail that has sent genuine shockwaves through every corner of the WWE universe since the story first broke, was Brock Lesnar bleeding. His forehead split open, blood visible and undeniable and entirely real in a way that transcends the normal language of wrestling storytelling and lands firmly in the territory of genuine human vulnerability. Brock Lesnar, the man who has spent 20 years being the instrument of other people's physical destruction, the man who has made entire careers out of leaving opponents broken and bloodied and humiliated, was found at the loading docks of a Sacramento arena covered in his own blood, looking by multiple witness accounts like a man who had been genuinely, seriously hurt. Paul Heyman was present for all of it, and the image of Paul Heyman frantically calling for medical assistance while his client bled on the concrete of a car park is one of the most striking and significant things this entire rivalry has produced. Because Heyman's composure, that unshakable, perfectly calibrated, theatrically precise composure that has defined him across decades in this industry, was completely and utterly absent in that moment. This was not the special counsel managing a narrative or controlling a room or working the audience. This was a person who genuinely cares about Brock Lesnar's physical well-being, confronted with direct evidence that the situation has escalated well beyond anything his considerable experience, intelligence, and political instinct had prepared him to handle. Think about Heyman's offer to represent Oba Femi in the event that he loses at Wrestlemania. That hedge, that carefully constructed contingency that suggested the Weissman privately harbored serious doubts about whether Lesnar could survive this rivalry with his physical dominance intact, looks considerably more prescient in the aftermath of what happened at those loading docks. Whatever private fears Heyman had been managing beneath the surface of his confident public proclamations, whatever uncertainty he had been quietly navigating while outwardly projecting total confidence in his client, has now been given vivid and bloody confirmation that the threat Oba Femi represents is even more serious and even more immediate than anyone had fully accounted for. The medical information coming out of the arena in the immediate aftermath of the incident is deeply troubling for the viability of WrestleMania 42 in its current scheduled form. Multiple contusions, a possible fractured rib, and the broader and more difficult to quantify damage of what it does to a competitor's physical readiness and psychological state for the most important match of the year to be ambushed in a car park, left bleeding on concrete, just days before that match is scheduled to take place. The physical damage alone is significant. The cumulative psychological weight of it, the reality of being hunted and found and hurt in a space where you believed yourself to be safe, is something that has no easy medical category, but that any serious student of professional wrestling understands to be real and meaningful. Triple H is reportedly furious, and the specific texture of that fury is worth examining carefully because it operates on several distinct levels at once. There is the personal level, the frustration of watching a meticulously constructed safety plan fail at the precise moment it was supposed to have successfully carried both men to Las Vegas without further incident, in the one window where the system had its greatest exposure. There is the professional level, the very real prospect of one of WWE's most marquee WrestleMania attractions being physically compromised by a post-show incident that his own security infrastructure was specifically designed and deployed to prevent. And there is the broader institutional level, the deeply uncomfortable reality that Oba Femi has now demonstrated definitively and publicly that the structures WWE puts in place to manage its most volatile and unpredictable elements have a ceiling. And that this particular individual is entirely capable of exceeding that ceiling when he determines it is necessary to do so. That last dimension is perhaps the most significant in terms of what it means for the company going forward, because Triple H and the WWE authority structure are not simply dealing with a superstar who operates aggressively within the established framework of professional wrestling programming. They are dealing with someone who exits that framework entirely when the situation demands it, someone for whom a no-contact policy issued by the head of creative and talent relations is an obstacle to be studied, circumvented, and ultimately dismantled rather than a boundary to be respected. That is a fundamentally different kind of problem, and it does not have a straightforward institutional solution. What Oba Femi did at the loading docks of the Golden One Center is the single most definitive statement about his character, his intentions, and his relationship to power that this entire rivalry has produced. More than the Royal Rumble elimination, more than the powerbomb through the commentary table. More than the contract signing confrontation or the 4 words that visibly shook Paul Heyman or any of the other extraordinary moments that have been generated across weeks of some of the most compelling television this company has produced in years. Because all of those moments happened within the context of professional wrestling programming, within the cameras and the crowds and the established structural framework of a live WWE broadcast, where everything that happens carries the implicit context of performance and narrative and storytelling. The loading dock ambush happened after all of that was over, when nobody was watching in any meaningful sense, when the audience had gone home and the production had wrapped and there was nothing to gain from it in terms of crowd reaction or narrative positioning or the advancement of a television storyline. Nothing except the simple, brutal, entirely personal reality of Oba Femi deciding that Brock Lesnar needed to bleed before WrestleMania, and making that happen regardless of every system and every person and every structure that had been deliberately constructed to prevent exactly that outcome. That is not the behavior of a challenger trying to gain a competitive advantage. That is the behavior of a predator who has spent weeks studying every weakness, every vulnerability, every gap in the defenses of the beast, and has now demonstrated with complete and total clarity that he has the capability and the willingness to exploit all of them. Brock Lesnar has been the hunter in professional wrestling for 20 years. He is the man who made ambushes his signature, the man who taught every locker room he has ever been a part of that nowhere was safe when the beast had decided it was time to strike, the man who invented, in many ways, the very playbook that Oba Femi used against him at those loading docks. On the night of the final Monday Night Raw before WrestleMania 42, Oba Femi turned that playbook back on its author and showed the beast with absolute, undeniable, blood-soaked clarity what it actually feels like to be the prey. Las Vegas is 3 days away. Brock Lesnar is bleeding. And the question of whether the beast can gather himself, heal enough, and find the kind of psychological reset that this situation demands in the time remaining is one that nobody inside WWE or outside of it can answer with any confidence right now. Thank you so much for watching Wrestling Juice. We will see you in the next one.